From a white man voicing a black maid to 3 different actresses playing the same character within 3 years, Beulah's journey from radio to television is filled with shocking casting changes, tragic behind-the-scenes stories, and groundbreaking firsts that changed TV history forever, including one Oscar winner who filmed just 6 episodes before tragedy struck. Fact 1. White man created and voiced. Beulah, here's something that would never fly today. The character of Beulah, a black maid who became one of early television's most recognizable figures, was originally created and performed by a white man doing a voice impression. Marlon Hurt, a white actor working on the popular radio show Fibber McGee and Molly, introduced the character in 1944 and voiced her for years using an exaggerated high-pitched falsetto that was meant to sound like an African-American woman. The whole setup was designed as a gimmick to surprise and entertain live studio audiences who couldn't see who was actually speaking into the microphone. The performance itself was theatrical in the most literal sense. Hurt would position himself with his back turned away from the microphone at the start of each broadcast, standing there silently while the other actors performed their lines. When the moment arrived for Beulah to make her entrance, the character Fibber McGee would call out, "Oh, Beulah," which served as Hurt's cue to dramatically spin around, face the microphone, and deliver Beulah's signature catchphrase in that distinctive squeaky voice, "Who dat ballin' for Beulah?" Week after week, this moment never failed to generate shocked laughter from the studio audience, who were continually amazed and amused that this voice they associated with a black woman was actually coming from a white man. The radio announcer would dutifully read the cast credits at the end of each episode, clearly stating that Marlon Hurt played Beulah, yet somehow audiences always seemed surprised by the reveal. This racially insensitive practice was common in entertainment at the time. Carrying over from minstrel show traditions, but it represented exactly the kind of stereotypical portrayal that would later spark intense controversy when Beulah transitioned to television. Fact 2. 4 different lead actresses in 3 years. If you think modern television shows have casting problems, consider this. During Beulah's 3-year run from 1950 to 1953, the title character was played by 4 different actresses, making it nearly impossible for audiences to form any consistent attachment to the show's main character. The constant revolving door of lead performers began with Ethel Waters, an acclaimed singer and actress who originated the television role in 1950 and carried the show through its first season before quitting in 1951. When Waters departed, the producers brought in Hattie McDaniel, the legendary Oscar-winning actress from Gone, with the Wind, but she managed to film only 6 episodes before falling seriously ill. Louise Beavers then stepped in to replace McDaniel and played Beulah for the remainder of the 1951 through 1952 seasons and into the 3rd season that aired in late 1952. The chaos wasn't limited to just the title character either, because virtually every single recurring role on the show was recast at least once during the series' brief existence. The Henderson family, which consisted of Harry, Alice, and their son Donnie, all changed actors between seasons. Beulah's boyfriend, Bill Jackson, was played by 3 different actors during the run, and even her friend Oriole next door was portrayed by 2 different actresses. This level of casting instability was almost unheard of in early television, especially for a show that was considered successful enough to run for 3 full seasons. Viewers tuning in week after week would have encountered an entirely different cast from one season to the next, creating a jarring and disorienting viewing experience that's hard to imagine any modern show surviving. Fact 3. Hattie McDaniel's 6 lost episodes. When production on Beulah moved to Hollywood in the summer of 1951, the show's producers made what seemed like a perfect casting decision by hiring Hattie McDaniel, who had made history in 1940 as the first African American to win an Academy Award for her unforgettable performance as Mammy in Gone with the Wind. McDaniel had already been voicing Beulah on the radio version of the show since 1947, earning $1,000 per week and doubling the program's ratings. so bringing her to television felt like a natural transition that would give the show both star power and continuity with the radio audience. However, McDaniel's time on the television version turned out to be tragically brief, as she managed to film only 6 episodes before her health deteriorated and she became too ill to continue working on the series. The situation created an unusual production dilemma because the episodes McDaniel had completed were considered too valuable to simply discard, yet the actress was clearly unable to return to finish out the season. The producers decided to shelve McDaniel's 6 episodes while they brought in Louise Beavers as an emergency replacement to film the bulk of the second season's episodes. When the second season finally premiered in April of 1952, it began with all of the Beavers episodes airing first, and then the 6 previously filmed McDaniel episodes were quietly tagged onto the end of the season, airing from July through August of 1952. By that time, McDaniel had learned she was suffering from advanced breast cancer, and she passed away in October of 1952 at the age of 57. Never seeing how audiences responded to her brief television appearances. Fact 4. Ethel Waters quit in disgust. Ethel Waters made history when she became the first black actress to star in her own network television series with Beulah in 1950, but the groundbreaking nature of this achievement was overshadowed by the painful reality of what the role actually required her to do. Waters, who was already an established and highly respected performer with an impressive career as a singer and actress, found herself playing a stereotypical maid character that relied heavily on the kind of racial caricatures that had been common in entertainment for decades. After completing the first season of the show, Waters quit in 1951, publicly stating that she found the portrayal of black characters on the program to be degrading and demeaning, making it clear that she could no longer participate in perpetuating these harmful stereotypes, even if it meant walking away from steady work. The situation was made even more frustrating by the fact that this role as a maid on a sitcom was essentially the only consistent employment that someone of Waters' tremendous talent and accomplishments could secure in the entertainment industry at that time. Despite her success on Broadway, her acclaimed recording career, and her Academy Award nomination for the film Pinky in 1949, Hollywood and television had so few opportunities for black performers that even a star of Waters' caliber had to choose between playing a stereotypical domestic servant or having no regular work at all. Waters' decision to leave Beulah demonstrated both her dignity and her willingness to sacrifice financial stability rather than continue participating in a show that she felt diminished her and portrayed her race in a negative light, even though walking away meant losing the kind of steady paycheck that most actors desperately needed. Fact 5. Gone with the Wind reunion. More than a decade after they appeared together in one of Hollywood's most famous films, 2 actresses from Gone with the Wind found themselves working together again on the small screen under remarkably similar circumstances. Butterfly McQueen, who became instantly recognizable for her high-pitched voice and memorable performance as the panicked maid Prissy in the 1939 epic, was cast as Oriole in the first season of Beulah, playing yet another domestic servant character. When Hattie McDaniel was brought in to take over the title role during the show's second season, it created an unexpected reunion between the 2 actresses who had both portrayed enslaved women in Gone with the Wind, though their time together on Beulah turned out to be quite brief since McQueen was replaced when the entire cast was overhauled alongside McDaniel's arrival. The reunion carried a certain sad irony because both actresses had experienced the same humiliation back in 1939 when Gone with the Wind premiered in Atlanta at a whites-only theater, meaning that neither McQueen nor McDaniel were permitted to attend the debut of the film that had made them famous despite their significant roles in the production. Now, over 10 years later, they were both still being cast primarily in servant roles because those were essentially the only parts available to black actresses in Hollywood and on television during this era. McQueen had grown so frustrated with being typecast in these demeaning roles that she had actually quit acting in films back in 1947, making her appearance on Beulah something of a reluctant return to the same kind of work she had tried to escape, while McDaniel continued taking whatever roles she could get until her health failed. Fact 6. Actor quit over Uncle Tom portrayal. Not everyone involved with Beulah was willing to stay silent about the problematic nature of the show's portrayal of black characters, and one actor made his objections known in a very public way by simply walking off the set and never returning. Percy Harris, who went by the nickname Bud and had been cast as Bill Jackson, Beulah's boyfriend who ran a fix-it shop but spent most of his time hanging around her kitchen, quit the show just a few months into the first season after becoming increasingly uncomfortable with what the writers were asking him to do. Harris made his reasons for leaving absolutely clear by publicly accusing the show's producers of forcing him to portray what he described as an Uncle Tom character, a term that refers to a black person who acts overly subservient to white people, and he stated that he felt the comic situations and dialogue he was being given were racially degrading and demeaning to African Americans. The show's producers had to scramble to replace Harris in the middle of the season, and they brought in Dooley Wilson, an actor who was already famous for playing Sam the piano player in the classic film Casablanca, where he performed the unforgettable song As Time Goes By. Wilson took over the role of Bill Jackson and continued playing the character until the entire cast was replaced when the show moved to Hollywood. Harris's decision to quit and his willingness to publicly criticize the show demonstrated that there was real resistance from black performers who understood they were being asked to perpetuate harmful stereotypes, even though speaking out meant risking their careers and losing much-needed work in an industry that offered them very few opportunities to begin with. Fact 7. First hit sitcom without a laugh track. While Beulah is often remembered for its controversial portrayal of racial stereotypes, the show actually deserves recognition for being a genuine technical pioneer in television comedy by becoming the first successful sitcom to air without any kind of laugh track or audience laughter, a bold choice that wouldn't become common until decades later. The year 1950 marked a turning point in television comedy production because that's when another show called The Hank McCoon Show introduced the very first artificial laugh track to American television, recording audience laughter separately and then adding it to the soundtrack during editing to tell viewers when something was supposed to be funny. Most sitcoms quickly adopted this technique because producers believed that hearing other people laugh would encourage audiences at home to laugh along and find the show more entertaining. Beulah, however, took the opposite approach and chose to present its comedy completely straight without any canned laughter or studio audience reactions, trusting that viewers would find the situations and dialogue amusing on their own without being prompted by artificial sound effects. This decision was particularly unusual for a show that aired on ABC from 1950 to 1953, right during the period when laugh tracks were becoming the industry standard, and it meant that Beulah was filmed using a single camera setup more like a movie than the multi-camera format that other sitcoms used when filming in front of live audiences. The show's format would eventually influence later comedies that also chose to skip the laugh track, though it would take many years before audiences fully accepted sitcoms that didn't tell them when to laugh, making Beulah's original approach surprisingly ahead of its time from a technical standpoint. Fact 8. Filmed in the Bronx, not Hollywood. Most people assume that early television shows were either filmed in Los Angeles, where the movie studios were located, or broadcast live from New York City. But Beulah had a much more unusual production setup during its first season that allowed its star to juggle two major projects at the same time. The show was actually filmed at Biograph Studios, a historic facility located in the Bronx at 807 East 175th Street, which had originally been built back in 1912 as one of the major studios of the silent film era before eventually being leased out to various production companies. This New York location was specifically chosen because Ethel Waters, who starred as Beulah during the first season, was simultaneously performing every night on Broadway in the critically acclaimed play The Member of the Wedding, a role that would eventually earn her major awards and an Academy Award nomination when she reprised it in the film version. The arrangement allowed Waters to film episodes of Beulah during the day at the Bronx studio and then head into Manhattan to perform on stage in the evenings, maintaining both commitments without having to choose between them or travel back and forth across the country. This convenient setup came to an end when Waters quit the show in 1951, and the producers decided to bring in Hattie McDaniel as her replacement, at which point the entire production relocated from New York to Hollywood, where most television shows were being made. The move to California also coincided with a complete overhaul of the cast, meaning that the Bronx-filmed first season with Waters represented a unique chapter in the show's history that was quite different from everything that came after. Fact 9. 15-year TV drought for black women. When Beulah aired its final episode on September 22, 1953, it marked the end of not just one show but the complete disappearance of black women from leading roles on American television for an astonishingly long period of time. Despite the show's problems with stereotypical portrayals and its controversial depiction of racial dynamics, it had at least provided visibility and steady employment for black actresses in an industry that offered them almost nothing. And once it was canceled, television networks seemingly decided that they had no interest in featuring black women in starring roles at all. The drought lasted for 15 full years, meaning that an entire generation of viewers grew up watching television without ever seeing a black woman as the lead character in a series, and black actresses found themselves shut out of opportunities that might have advanced their careers or provided them with the financial security that regular television work could offer. The barrier finally broke in 1968 when Diahann Carroll starred in Julia, playing a widowed nurse raising her young son, which was notable not just for featuring a black woman in the lead role, but also for presenting her as a professional working mother rather than a domestic servant. The long gap between Beulah and Julia demonstrated how the cancellation of one problematic show led to a massive step backward in representation rather than progress toward better and more diverse portrayals of black women on television. While Beulah may have perpetuated harmful stereotypes, its absence created a void that networks seem perfectly content to leave unfilled for a decade and a half, effectively erasing black women from the small screen during a crucial period in television's development. Fact 10. Most episodes are lost forever. Beulah exists in a strange state of preservation, where technically every single episode still exists somewhere, but almost none of them are actually available for the public to see, creating a situation where the show is simultaneously completely intact and almost entirely lost. During its 3-year run from 1950 to 1953, a total of 87 episodes were filmed and produced, and all 87 of those episodes are currently housed in an archive stored on their original 35mm film format, which means that somewhere in a climate-controlled vault, complete copies of every episode are sitting preserved exactly as they were broadcast. However, the general public and even most television historians have no access to these archived copies, and only 7 episodes are known to exist in 16mm format that circulates among collectors and can occasionally be found online or in specialty collections. The situation is particularly frustrating because Beulah was actually quite popular during the 1950s and was widely distributed in syndication packages to local television stations all across the country, meaning that at one point these episodes were being broadcast regularly and copies existed in dozens or perhaps hundreds of locations. Over the decades that followed, most of those syndication copies were either lost, damaged, or deliberately destroyed as stations cleaned out their film libraries and made room for newer programming, not realizing or perhaps not caring that they were eliminating access to an important piece of television history. The few episodes that do survive provide a glimpse into early television and the complicated racial dynamics of the era. But the inaccessibility of the other 80 episodes means that researchers and viewers are working with an incomplete picture of what the show was actually like. Fact 11. Future Deadpool star's TV debut. Long before she became known for playing the foul-mouthed blind owl in the Deadpool movies or earning Emmy and Golden Globe nominations for her powerful performance in the groundbreaking miniseries Roots, Leslie Uggams got her very first taste of professional acting on Beulah when she was just 6 years old in 1951. The young Uggams was cast to play Beulah's niece in an episode during Ethel Waters' tenure as the show's star. And Waters took an immediate liking to both the child actress and her mother, often inviting them to private musical gatherings she hosted. What makes this early appearance particularly significant is not just that it launched Uggams into a career that would span over 7 decades, but that Waters used her position as the show's star to protect the young girl from the kind of racial stereotyping that plagued so much of the production. When the show's producers and hairstylists wanted to put little Leslie's hair into what they called pickaninny braids, a deeply offensive hairstyle associated with racist caricatures of black children, Waters immediately stepped in and refused to allow it, insisting that Uggams would wear her hair exactly the way her mother had styled it with simple dignity and respect. This moment demonstrated Waters' awareness of the problematic nature of the stereotypes the show was perpetuating, and her determination to shield at least one young performer from the worst aspects of that treatment, even while she herself was trapped in a role she found degrading. Uggams would go on to become a pioneering performer in her own right, eventually hosting one of the first variety shows starring a black woman and maintaining an active career well into her 80s. Fact 12. NAACP condemned show but spared sponsor. The NAACP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and one of the most important civil rights organizations in America, found itself in a complicated position when it came to addressing the problematic portrayals of black characters on television in the early 1950s. At their annual convention in June of 1951, the organization publicly condemned both Beulah and another controversial show called Amos and Andy, issuing a statement that accused both programs of depicting black people in a derogatory manner that tends to strengthen the conclusion among uninformed or prejudiced peoples that Negroes and other minorities are inferior, lazy, dumb, and dishonest. This condemnation made it clear that the NAACP recognized the harm that these stereotypical portrayals were causing and wanted both shows to be held accountable for perpetuating racist caricatures that damaged how black people were perceived by white audiences. However, when it came time to take concrete action beyond just issuing statements, the NAACP made a curious strategic decision by choosing to organize a consumer boycott against only the sponsor of Amos and Andy, while completely sparing Procter & Gamble, the major corporation that sponsored Beulah and had been paying for the show's production since 1947. The organization never publicly explained why they decided to focus their boycott efforts on just one show instead of both, leaving historians to speculate about whether they felt Amos and Andy was somehow worse in its stereotyping, whether they had limited resources and could only target one sponsor at a time, or whether Procter & Gamble's size and influence made them too powerful to challenge effectively with a consumer boycott. Fact 13. Complete cast overhaul between seasons. The transition between the first and second seasons of Beulah wasn't just a matter of replacing the lead actress, but rather a complete and total reinvention of the entire show that left absolutely no member of the original cast in place. When production moved from New York to Hollywood in 1951 and Hattie McDaniel was brought in to replace Ethel Waters, the producers decided to start fresh with every single role, meaning that viewers who tuned in for the second season would have been watching what was essentially an entirely different show with entirely different people playing characters they thought they already knew. The Henderson family, which consisted of the father Harry, the mother Alice, and their young son Donnie, were all recast with new actors who looked and sounded nothing like the performers who had originated those roles during the first season. The supporting characters didn't fare any better in terms of continuity, as Bill Jackson, Beulah's boyfriend, who had already been played by two different actors during the first season after Percy Harris quit, was now being portrayed by a third performer named Ernest Whitman, who replaced Dooley Wilson. Even Oriole, the scatterbrained maid who worked for the family next door and served as Beulah's friend, changed from Butterfly McQueen to Ruby Dandridge, who happened to be the mother of the famous actress and singer Dorothy Dandridge and had previously voiced the character on the radio version of the show. This level of complete cast replacement was extraordinarily rare in television and created a jarring viewing experience where the only constant was the title of the show itself, as everything else from the actors to the filming location to the overall feel of the production had been fundamentally altered. Fact 14. ABC's first hit sitcom. When Beulah premiered on October 3, 1950, it represented much more than just another television show making its debut because it actually became the first successful situation comedy in the history of ABC television and proved that the struggling young network could produce programming that audiences actually wanted to watch. ABC was still very much the underdog in the television industry at that time, competing against the much more established and powerful networks CBS and NBC, which had deeper pockets, better connections to Hollywood studios, and far more affiliate stations reaching viewers across the country. For a fledgling network trying to establish itself as a legitimate competitor, having a hit show of any kind was absolutely crucial to survival. And having that hit come in the form of a sitcom was particularly valuable because situation comedies were rapidly becoming the most popular form of entertainment on television. Beulah's success demonstrated that ABC had the ability to identify promising properties, adapt them effectively for the television medium, and produce shows that could attract substantial audiences despite the network's limited reach and resources compared to its bigger rivals. The show aired on Tuesday nights at 7:30 Eastern Time and managed to build a loyal following that kept tuning in week after week, giving ABC something it desperately needed in those early years. Proof that it belonged in the conversation alongside the major networks. While Beulah would eventually be remembered more for its controversial content and complicated legacy regarding racial representation, its importance to ABC's development as a network cannot be overstated because it essentially paved the way for the network to invest in more comedy programming and established that ABC could compete successfully in the sitcom marketplace. Fact 15. Cleveland's mysterious 7-year syndication run, one of the strangest chapters in Beulah's history, happened after the show had already been canceled and disappeared from national television when a local station in Cleveland, Ohio, decided to air the show in syndication and then kept it on the air for an incredibly long time that defied all expectations. Starting in 1955, just 2 years after Beulah's final original episode had aired on ABC, the show began broadcasting in Cleveland on a Monday through Friday schedule, meaning that viewers in that city could watch Beulah episodes every single weekday as part of their regular television routine. What makes this particularly remarkable is that the syndication run continued all the way through 1962, giving the show a 7-year daily presence in Cleveland that far exceeded the typical lifespan of syndicated programming from that era, when most shows would cycle through their available episodes relatively quickly and then disappear from the schedule to make room for something new. The extended run suggests that Beulah must have developed an unexpectedly strong and loyal audience in Cleveland, who kept tuning in day after day and year after year, giving the local station enough reason to continue airing the episodes rather than replacing them with different programming. This sustained popularity is particularly puzzling given that the show had been controversial during its original network run and had faced criticism from civil rights organizations for its stereotypical portrayals, yet somehow it found a lasting home with Cleveland viewers who apparently enjoyed it enough to support 7 years of continuous weekday broadcasts. The reasons behind Cleveland's unusual embrace of Beulah remain something of a mystery, as there's no clear explanation for why this particular city became such a stronghold for the show long after it had faded from the national conversation. National conversation. National conversation. National conversation.